So today I won't be, because we have a new setup today. I won't be as strict as I usually am, but if it's easy for you to move so that I can see your face, I would enjoy that. Even if it's not enjoyable for you to move so that you can see my face. It's helpful for me for the talk because I experience this talk as a conversation. I know that when I'm in the audience, it's an opportunity to disappear. It's an opportunity to vanish. And that's very nice. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of the reason that we meditate is in order to disappear and to vanish. So it's nice to disappear, vanish, not exist, not participate. But in fact, even at those times, we're still existing and participating. And so as I talk, you, often without knowing it, respond with your posture, with your facial expression, with your eyes, and that impacts the direction the talk goes. So it's useful for me to have that information, and it's the reason that I like to see everyone's face, especially because if you give a talk to more than about 100 people, that stops happening as well. Maybe some of you know how to give a talk to 100 or 200 or 500 people and still have that intimate relationship with each one, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So it's nice that we have this size group because I can see each person, keep track of each person. Past 150 or so, it's just a lot of people. And then past about, I don't know, 5,000 or so, you're not talking really to people anymore. You're talking to a mass. Not talking to a lot of individuals. You're talking to one mass. But here we don't have that. We have relationships, and I think of that as being very precious. For this year, we are focusing on a spiritual teacher who lived in the United States from the early 20th century until the late 20th century, whose name was Peace Pilgrim. She was a very impressive person and a very impressive teacher. She spent, actually, maybe some of you know this, she spent quite a bit of time in Vermont. She did a tour of New England, which ended in Burlington, Vermont. She was here. She was actually here on a few occasions. And right now we live, some of us, the residents of the monastery live in Johnson, which is right next to the Long Trail. And she hiked the Long Trail, the Appalachian Trail, a few times, and was a person who used walking as a spiritual practice. So she, in her meditative way, praying with every step, she walked through this state, both before and after she became Peace Pilgrim. She gave up her given name, became Peace Pilgrim, and walked as a pilgrim for the final few decades of her life. The message that she had for us, the message that she walked for, was overcome evil with good, and falsehood with truth, and hatred with love. This is the way of peace. And she would often say that as a pilgrim, she walked a pilgrimage. And there are different kinds of pilgrimages. You can walk a pilgrimage to a place or for a thing. And I suppose that talking to you now, for me to say you can walk a pilgrimage to a place, that doesn't sound very surprising. I suppose you've heard of people who walk pilgrimages to some place, wherever that might be. And I suppose you're also not particularly surprised that you could walk a pilgrimage for a thing, that it would be possible to walk a pilgrimage for world peace. I'm walking for world peace. You hear people say this nowadays actually quite often. There are a lot of people who do this. It's courageous. It's brave. It's powerful. It's beautiful. And happily, it's not new. People do this nowadays. It's amazing. Because to my knowledge, from a historical perspective, at least around here, but maybe worldwide, she was the first person who had that idea. I don't know of anyone else who did. I could be wrong, but simply the fact that I've looked into this and researched it and have come to the conclusion, which could be wrong, you may know of other people who've done this before her, but simply the fact that it was that rare just a few decades ago, and now isn't rare, now is taken for granted. Yeah, you could walk a pilgrimage for world peace. Sure, people do that. That's a great idea. Just the fact that it's common now, when it was, at least in the, say, the 50s, totally unknown in our culture anyway, at least in the United States in the 50s. That was totally unknown, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was unknown before her worldwide. The fact that it's so common now is a very important fact, because it indicates that here's this woman, this uneducated, poor, old, helpless woman with no special skills. She wasn't good at anything. That's what she says herself. She had no special skills. She wasn't good at things. This completely ordinary person who had no money, no power, very little fame, actually. Even now, when I mentioned we're going to talk about Peace Pilgrim, a lot of the people in this very group hadn't heard of her. Now, if any group would have heard of Peace Pilgrim, it's this group. And a lot of people here hadn't heard of her. So she didn't have fame or money or power or skills. She was about the most worthless person in the world. Nothing. She even gave up what she had. This completely worthless person. That kind of person apparently changed our culture. Apparently, as far as I can tell, looking at it carefully, she was one of the most influential people in United States history. Which is interesting because a lot of the time when we think about influential people, we think about people who we've heard of. We think about the famous people who we know, but actually, at one point, someone asked her, and some of you probably have seen this in the book. I don't remember exactly the phrasing, but it was something like, maybe some of you can remember the exact phrasing. It was something like, so if you're enlightened, how come you're not famous? If you're awakened, if you found your purpose, why aren't you famous? Anyone remember the exact wording of that? It's okay. I think I have the meaning down. I think I have the meaning just about as it was meant by that person. And I don't have her wording exactly, but she said, most awakened people aren't famous. Mm-hmm. It's actually rare to be both awake and famous. That's unusual. And for many people, being famous isn't useful in terms of having an influence, having an impact on the world. A lot of the time, we think of fame and influence as being similar. But she was wise enough to see through that. And to see that actually being famous sometimes prevents us, makes it harder to be influential. What did she do? She didn't have any particularly good advertising campaigns. And this was an era when advertising was taking over. I don't know if any of you are very familiar with advertising. Some of you are. But that era, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that was it. It was amazing what was happening. My grandfather was in that industry at that time. And his company was responsible for many iconic figures, such as the Marlboro Man. Yes? Very powerful concepts and communication. And yet I wonder if the Marlboro Man had as much influence as Peace Pilgrim on our culture. I do. And the reason I say that is that the Marlboro Man, while being a brilliant icon, I have to say. I know it's maybe family pride, but really smart. That was really well done. So many clever things brought together in one single emotion. It's just great. The Marlboro Man. Really. This is amazing. I mean, look at the reaction in this room. And again, if this is the room, think about this population. You know, these kind of progressive Vermonters coming to mindfulness gathering. And this group has an emotional reaction to the Marlboro Man. That guy is really powerful. You know? Killed, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people.
Millions.
Maybe millions. Just him. It's amazing. So you might think, well, that's a famous guy. You know? His fame, it goes beyond historicity. Right? He didn't even exist. And yet he has this enormous mythological power in our culture. It's amazing. Isn't that a person of influence? Peace Pilgrim. No advertising. No one knew about her. She walked around and talked to people one by one. Talked to one person, finished talking to them, walked for a while, talked to another person. It's absurd. That would never work. That's not going to change anything. No one would be influenced by that. Like, she's just talking to one person at a time, it's not going to do anything. That might be what we think. But I'd say that she had a larger influence on our culture than the Marlboro Man. Which I know is a big thing to say. And I say it's big because it actually has a big influence on how a lot of us perceive ourselves and our lives. It's not big in some kind of historical sense. I'm not a historian. My other grandfather, a very well-known historian. I know what it's like when someone's an historian. I am not that. So I'm not claiming to give you a history lesson right now. I'm claiming to give you a lesson about mindfulness right now. And the fact that Peace Pilgrim, because she had such clear awareness, because she had such integrity, and because she could speak from a place of authenticity to one person at a time, because of that, she could change the culture. Whereas the Marlboro Man, just to talk about him for a while, was actually a person of no power at all. He was a slave to culture and a slave to desire. Unable to have any real influence on how people see things because he is a slave to how people see and what people want. Peace Pilgrim was free of how people see and what people want. And because of that, she could influence how people see and what people want. She got to the point in her life when she realized for herself, in her own direct experience. Now, at that moment, she got to the point of desperation at this point when she had given up on changing the world. You understand? She had given up. That's impossible for me. I'm just this ordinary, poor woman with no special skills or education. I can't have no real influence on the world. Give me a break. I can't even have an influence on my community. Give me a break. And finally, she even gave up on having an influence on herself. So I can't even change myself. I can only do one thing, and that is surrender. Change nothing at all. Have no influence on anything, ever. She got to that point. The opposite of what I think most of us consider to be success. This is a person who has no power. Peace Pilgrim was a person of no power, no influence. A hopeless, helpless woman with no money, education, or special skills. Certainly, no marketing campaign. She came to that point of pure surrender. And with that surrender, she dropped, she lost the ways that she saw things. She dropped what she wanted, how she saw things. She lost her opinions, she lost her preferences, she lost her assumptions, she lost her self-centeredness. Because she had the direct experience of stepping outside of assumptions and preferences, outside of opinions and desires. Because she had the direct experience of stepping outside of that, she, for the first time, had the ability to influence that. Which, again, is a big thing to say. And one of the difficulties that a lot of us have in the practice of meditation, the practice of mindfulness, is admitting, facing our powerlessness over the things that our identity requires us to have power over. So as we sit in meditation, we initially, just to sit down, we acknowledge, okay, for now I'm sitting here, I can't have any influence on the world. Okay, I'm just sitting here, I'm not doing anything, I can't have any influence on the world. That's a big step. And in fact, when people say, I don't have time to meditate, obviously everyone has the same amount of time to meditate. You know, no one can make the claim, I don't have as much time to meditate as you do. We all have exactly the same amount of time. There's no difference in the amount of time each of us has. That isn't what we're saying. If someone says, I don't have time to meditate, that's not what you have to understand. The issue isn't the issue. What they're saying is the issue isn't the issue. It's not that we don't have time to meditate. We all have exactly the same amount of time to meditate. It's that we're saying, I, for now, want to have an influence on the world. That's what I want to use my time for. Which, I don't judge that. That's fine. Just say what you mean. What you mean is, for now, I want to have an influence on the world. Now, that could be good. I'm not saying it's bad to have an influence on the world. I think it's good to have an influence on the world. That's important. That's a part of this path. It's just important that we say that we say what we mean. At a certain point, we may realize, for now, I'm letting go. I'm surrendering. I'm not going to have an influence on the world for now. And then we sit down. And we then need to acknowledge, it's very quick, happens pretty quickly. I don't have control over the world while I meditate, but I actually don't even have control over my own mind while I meditate. I thought I was at least going to have control over my mind. I thought that at least that would be mine to control. It's my mind, after all. I own it. It's my own mind. It's mine. If anything's mine, my mind is mine. And then we have to face it's really not. It's just happening somehow. Okay, so then I can't influence the world and I can't influence my mind. But at least I can control my body. And this is really what I am, after all, right? Ultimately speaking, I'm my body. But then we notice that our body doesn't submit to our control either. We notice that in a number of ways. One is that maybe we're in pain, in physical pain, and we can't tell our body, stop it. Stop being in pain now. Don't be in pain, body. Doesn't work. Stop aging. Stop getting sick. Don't do that. I told you not to do that last time. Last year. Last time I got sick. Stop it. No, body doesn't listen. And then we discover our body has another layer, which is the emotional layer. Body, stop feeling sad, lonely, desperate, angry. Don't feel those things, body. Don't. I said stop it. It doesn't. Stop it. And so we have to deeply face what she was facing. And it's difficult for us because we often think that we're giving up. And that sense of giving up isn't understood to be an essential component of the surrender that's needed as we walk this path. And we come to terms with the fact that there There are going to be things happening in the world that I can't do anything about. There are going to be things happening in my mind that I can't do anything about. I'm going to keep on thinking thoughts I don't want to think. And I'm going to keep feeling things I don't want to feel. And if I have a kind of happiness that's dependent on the world being a certain way, my mind being a certain way, my thoughts happening in a certain way, and my feelings happening a certain way, then I will suffer. Then suffering is guaranteed. And so often when we enter this path, we enter it, in fact, because, and this happens a lot, I'll close my eyes so that I'm not looking at anyone, because we know who we are. We enter this path because we say, hey, spiritual path, hey, spiritual teacher, hey, spiritual tradition, let's make a deal. I'll follow this if that means that after some reasonable period of time, I stop feeling bad, I stop feeling negative emotions, and I stop having thoughts that I don't want to have. If I would stop having thoughts I don't want to have and stop having emotions that I don't want to have, well then, that's a good deal. I'll do just about anything for that. And then gradually discover, no, it doesn't work that way. Because our minds, our bodies aren't our own. We don't get to order them around. And so we come to a point, eventually, of, as she experienced, total surrender. And then we discover, oh, the world, it's not my own. This body is not my own. This mind is not my own. Which means that my happiness, my well-being, doesn't depend on those things. And we find a kind of happiness, a kind of authority that's independent of those conditions. And when we have that, then we've experienced what Peace Pilgrim calls the experience of the divine nature taking over, rather than the self-centered nature. Self-centered nature is the nature that wants to own the world, or at least parts of it, wants to own the body, or at least parts of it, wants to own the mind, or at least parts of it. I want to have those things, control those things, manipulate those things, and make them be the way I need them to be so that I can be happy. That kind of relationship dies. And the divine nature, not the self-centered nature, but as she says, the God-centered nature, awakens. And from that perspective of having dropped how we see things, our minds, having dropped what we want, which is to say, our bodies. Mental experience is our opinions, body experience is our preferences, is what we want, the desires for things, the feelings. When we've dropped those, then for the first time we can see in a way that is free from opinions and preferences, which means that for the first time, as she did, we can actually influence those things. As she says, the God-centered nature can control the body and the mind. And it even controls the world. And that's why she was a person who could say, she said clearly, that now that I've surrendered to the divine nature, to the God-centered nature, there's perfect control over my body and my mind. Perfect. She said, if I tell my body, lie down on this cement floor and be comfortable, it does. It lies down on the cement floor and is comfortable. Because if I find myself in a terrifying situation, my emotions start to flare up, I tell my emotions, calm down. And immediately they do. Perfect calm. He says, if I want to concentrate on something, I tell my mind, concentrate. Don't think again until I tell you to. And it doesn't. There's not another thought until I say, okay, now you can think. And then it thinks again. Until then, there's perfect concentration without a moment's distraction. These are the sorts of claims that she made. Now, anyone here who's done any meditation understands the significance of these claims. You understand that these are absurd claims. These are ridiculous claims. Ridiculous. Crazy. Incredible. Almost annoying. What are you talking about? That isn't real, we think. And I hear people say that. People say, I don't think she could have been real. This doesn't sound real. But the significance of her life is that it was real. And because that was real, that reality had an influence, had an impact, in a way that happily she never needed to take responsibility for. So we are here in order to cut through self-centeredness. We're here to cut through how we see things. We're here to cut through what we want. So that the choices we make are no longer controlled by those things. And when that happens, then regardless of whether we become famous, we are nonetheless influencing the world. Take a moment to straighten up, straightening your back, lifting your head high, and settle in, relaxing your body, finding a comfortable posture. And once again, straighten up. This time, inhale as you straighten up. Elongate your spine, and then exhale and settle in. And enter a relaxed but alert rhythm of breathing. And pay attention to your breathing. With each inhale, which is rhythmic, not forced, with each inhale, check to be sure that you're sitting up straight. And with each exhale, which is rhythmic and relaxed, check to make sure that you're tranquil, calm in your body. On the inhale, straighten and check for alertness. On the exhale, settle in and check for relaxation. Inhale, straighten up and check for alertness. Exhale, settle in, check for relaxation. And continue with that, gradually exploring how the alertness of the inhale extends into the exhale, and how the relaxation of the exhale extends into the inhale, until both are simultaneously present throughout the breathing cycle. Very good. And continuing with that exercise. Continuing with that exercise. We'll add another component. Pay attention to that alert, relaxed cycle of breathing. And as you pay attention to your breathing, do not pay attention to any thoughts or emotions. If you have no thoughts or emotions whatsoever, then simply continue with the breathing. If thoughts or emotions arise, observe them as if they're not your own. As if they're just sounds and feelings in your mind and your body that are free to come and go. As if they're part of the world. As if the words in your mind are the same as the words that I'm saying. They're just words that somebody is saying, but it's not you. The feelings arising are just the same. And without trying to stop those thoughts or emotions, without trying to get rid of them any more than you're trying to prevent me from talking right now, allowing them to happen. Return your attention to your breath, which you can practice right now as I'm talking. I'm talking, and yet you can attend to your breath. You can pay attention to what it feels like to breathe in a relaxed way, maintaining alertness. And yet, here I am talking. And talking is happening, breathing is happening. You don't need to stop me from talking in order to pay attention to your breathing. Now, if I stop talking, it may be easier to attend to your breathing. But the challenge now is to attend to your breathing even when I am talking. The talking is just happening. It's like a sound. Just like that sound. It's just sound. And the same is true of the voice in your mind. And the same is true of the feelings in your body. without trying to stop any of that. Don't pay attention to it. Pay attention to your breathing. Very good. Whatever thoughts, whatever emotions arise, that's fine. Surrender to that. Without trying to change that, without fighting against that, attend to your breath. Thoughts and emotions may not arise. Without trying to protect that, without grabbing onto that, attend to your breath. This is the practice of simpler and simpler. There's just one thing to do. Attend to your breath. We're doing less and less, changing less and less, controlling less and less, possessing less and less. There's just attention to breath. Not fighting against thoughts and emotions, not paying attention to thoughts and emotions. Just breathing. Everything else, we surrender. Our bodies are uncomfortable, we surrender to that. If we're tired, we surrender to that. If we're happy, we surrender to that. Energetic, surrender to that. But we don't pay attention to any of that. Only attention to breath. And most important, don't pay attention to whether you've been paying attention to your breath. Right now, attend to your breath. That's all. The memory of whether you were paying attention, that's just another thought. The expectation about whether you will be paying attention is a thought. A preference. I hope I pay attention is an emotion. A disappointment or shame. I haven't been paying attention to my breath. That's an emotion. Setting that aside, attend to your breath. Let those thoughts and emotions happen without paying attention to them. This is a time for discussion, conversation, uh, sunset viewing, anything that you'd like. About 30 minutes. Mm-hmm.
I found it really helpful during that exercise, envisioning Peace Pilgrim and realizing that, or envisioning having no control
Mm-hmm.
and dropping all control. And so at times I struggled, but then so I'd kind of get caught up in the emotion or pain,
Mm-hmm.
but then kind of think of the divine, kind of just the divine energy coming through or losing control. That would help. However, I also felt some strong emotions, such as like guilt or intense pain, and those were a little bit harder to drop.
Mm-hmm.
So I get kind of caught up in those.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you couldn't control whether you got caught up in that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the point, isn't it? We face the fact that we don't have control.
Mm-hmm.
That's the significance of the practice. I think that many of us live in an illusion of control. We convince ourselves that we have more control than we have. And as we sit, we can face exactly what you're saying. Something comes up like a strong emotion. We don't have control over the circumstances that cause that strong emotion. We don't have control over whether that emotion then arises. And we don't have control over whether we get caught up in it. It's important to look at that closely. Look at that very, very closely. Very, very important. And I'm not claiming, and she certainly wasn't claiming, that there's no such thing as action. She was very clear that we have free will, that we make a difference, that our choices have an influence on ourselves, on others, on the future. And yet, despite the fact that she was so clear on that, what you do matters. Make good choices. You can make a difference. Take responsibility for that fact. You'll be happier if you do. Nonetheless, she put this experience of facing our lack of control and then the surrender that comes with facing that at the center of the path. And that may seem nonsensical or paradoxical, but here we are. I don't think she's saying anything different from your own experience. So if you disagree, we're not just, it doesn't seem to make sense. It's not her that's not making sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah. She's just reporting. And that point of being right there where we are is the point of meditation. It's dangerous at that point to come to some kind of philosophical conclusion, like there is no such thing as control, right? Or I should have control over this. All those positions that we take, if we continue to practice, we see that they don't hold up. Ben?
Why is there much emphasis on rigor and control then? Or like why is it helpful push coming back to the breath or why is like the rigor component, why have you chosen that as one of the first things? And that might not be true.
Yeah, no, I personally ask people to make a great effort in this practice. That's one of my tendencies. And so the question is, why do that?
Yeah.
And I think you're also saying that there's a contradiction somewhere.
Yeah.
Where's the contradiction?
The contradiction is why spend so much time teaching in that style, that way, when the point is to surrender and not have control.
Yeah, I think the statement that we let go of control, that point, turns out to be deeply true. Which is to say that it's even true when it's self-referential. Yeah. So if we say give up control, then one of the things that we might give up control over is whether we're giving up control. If that's the case, then there wouldn't be any contradiction with making a great effort attempting to control our attention. Isn't that weird? What?
I didn't wrap my head.
Oh yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to wrap our heads around that. So this point of give up control is very, very deep. If we talk about it in that way, then we have to talk about it in a deep way. If we only say it's dangerous for us to say give up control in a shallow way, because then it's just one small step into be passive, let people walk all over you. There's nothing you can do about the world situation. Don't get involved. There's nothing you can do anyway. You can't even control your own thoughts. Right? It's very easy for it to go in that direction. And so we have to be sure that when we say let go of control, that isn't itself hypocritical. It would be hypocritical if we weren't willing to give up so much control that we were willing to take control. Did it make sense that time?
Yes.
You're even willing to take control over something. The point that happens when you then do that, when you then attempt to control your attention, is that you're forced to face the times when you can't. Yes? You try to concentrate and you have to face, I was just doing everything I could to concentrate. I was trying to control my mind and I couldn't do it. That's no longer, I will choose to give up control, which is actually, that's the nonsensical statement. And you're realizing I can't maintain control, which means I actually don't have control. But that isn't the end either. The point that Peace Pilgrim is making isn't, I hope you all realize that you don't have control over anything. The point she was making was, if you step out of a self-centered perspective, then you don't have any trouble controlling your mind. It's the self-centered perspective that's ineffective. So we've put ourselves in the point of the practice. I think a lot of us feel like the point of the practice is to, and it could be. You could say that the point of the practice is to accomplish something. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good way to talk about it. I wouldn't disagree with that as long as you were talking about it from a place of experience. But another way to think about the practice is that we do this practice in order to put ourselves between a rock and a hard place. We do this practice so that we face what's happening, what's really happening. We face it. We're able to actually face it. So it isn't so much, I will voluntarily, through my own choice, surrender. That's fine, but are you willing to surrender when you don't want to? That's actually the question. Do you give up control when you're trying to maintain control? Because otherwise it's just still on our own personal terms, and then we haven't gotten through that self-centered perspective. So this is very deep, actually. To talk about this, talk about surrender, to talk about giving our lives up. Talk about letting go of possession of our bodies, minds, lives, deaths, hopes, fears, opinions, preferences. That's actually quite deep. And the reason that I ask people to throw themselves in fully is so that we don't become complacent with a shallow, half-hearted view on that. The point that happens is that we throw ourselves in fully, trying to control our concentration, for example, and we can't. Now that puts us in a vulnerable position. And at that point, we have to step beyond ourselves. And that's the reason I tend to emphasize effort and striving. Does all that make sense?
Not completely, but okay. I mean, I don't think I can understand it.
Yeah, some of it made sense, maybe. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with cultivating surrender, effortlessness itself. That's a valid path. So I'm not saying that it's not. To do that itself, to let go directly, is good, is an effective path. People teach that way and it works. There's nothing wrong with that. That method has its strengths and its weaknesses. The strength, and as far as I'm concerned, the strength of saying just surrender, just let go, is that it's a more honest, direct way of teaching. People who teach that way are not at fault as much as I am. I teach in a way that's less clear and less direct, and that is, don't surrender. Take control. Make this happen. Do it with everything you have. Throw yourself in fully. Fully throw yourself in. And you can see that that's weird. What are you talking about? But it seems to work better. It's just more effective. And a lot of the time, something that's less intuitive is more effective. That happens sometimes in the real world. And the reason is that that the common thing, the reason it's more effective is that the common thing that happens when you tell someone to just surrender is that they don't. they set up a nice, peaceful state of mind in which they can believe they've surrendered. And there's still somebody there watching over it, making sure it's all okay, waiting for the thing to happen that's unacceptable, and then I'll have to take over again. And that isn't rooted out. But when you throw yourself in fully, then anything that isn't being thrown in fully, you can notice that. So the willingness to throw yourself in fully to try to take control is, in a strange way, or in a practical sense, often a deeper experience of surrender than surrendering. One example would be that the example I use a lot is that Dick Peabody, a member of the community, was telling me one time about kayaking. He went out kayaking. And he hadn't been kayaking for quite a while, and he just couldn't figure it out. It didn't feel right. And he tried to just relax and have it be natural. Come on, make it natural. Come on, natural, act natural. And he just couldn't do it. And he started, and you know him, he gets mad. And he got mad. He's frustrated. Why isn't this working? You know what he's like, right? Come on, I should be able to kayak. Got angry about it. And he started forcing and fighting, making it right. And it was worse and worse and worse and worse until he couldn't force anymore. He couldn't. He had run out of energy. His arms were in pain. He was exhausted, and he wasn't having any fun. And he finally just gave up. I don't like kayaking. And then his body relaxed. He said, oh, right. And and there it was, completely natural motion, which he couldn't have gotten himself to. He needed to exhaust himself to that point. He needed to get so tired that he had to surrender, and then he did. But he couldn't have just talked himself into surrendering. And that story, I think, is a good explanation for why I tend to teach the way I do. If you push yourself to a certain point, you must surrender. But as long as you're choosing to surrender, it's just unlikely that you're really going to. Of course, that would be great. I think in some cases it happens. Some people do that. It's rare, though. It's not a dependable path. You can kayak to the point when you're going to surrender. But how often is it that you can just get into a kayak and surrender? You can force it until you just, okay, whatever, I hate this. Okay, whatever. Oh, right. Oh, okay. It's often like that. So that's a little metaphor. I hope it clarifies a little bit as a metaphor versus an explanation. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting just listening to you say this, because I was going to just do a little report on, and then you just explained something for me that you didn't know you were explaining. So that was really great. But I was home for a couple of weeks, and I love my family dearly, and yet it's very chaotic for me, a lot of different energies, and it can be difficult sometimes. And I think you kind of just explained what happened. I was going to say my daily practice, how much it has really helped me each time I go. I feel I'm practicing different, I'm practicing being with my family differently. And I think you explained it better in that all this talk we've been doing with Peace Pilgrim and clinging, and especially the clinging to the views. I've just been really thinking about that so much, and how I just cling to my views so much more than I would like to admit. But I do, and now I'm accepting that, and it's helping me move beyond that. And what you just said, I think I got so exhausted going home all the time that I didn't even go home for a year. Usually I go home 2 or 3 times. My mother's aging, and I just couldn't cope. You know, it's just like, oh, and so I was really exhausted, but I knew I had to go home. I had to see my mom and my family, and I think I was exhausted to the point of I changed my behavior when I went home. And I was practicing not clinging to what I thought or the way, or judging anything that was going on. I just went in trying to be so much more open and just different, you know, and not try to judge less, try to realize if I judged, I was just clinging to some way that I thought things should be and whatever. And it was so wonderful. I was telling Lyda on the way in, it was like, I'm 61 years old, and it was probably, I've been living away for a long time. It was probably one of the best visits I ever had. And you really helped frame it there for me now, too. That was lovely. But, so I really appreciate all the over and over and over of non-clinging and this and that, and I obviously need to hear it more and more. But it's really made a difference for me.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for telling us. That's exactly it. Exactly it. And I use this practice to make myself be more natural. It's really common. But the thing that happens is that the practice exhausts our ability to make ourselves be anyway. And make others be anyway, and then turns out things don't need my help to be natural. Turns out I didn't need to get involved and make sure that things were the way they are. Yes. Similar, I think, to our conversation earlier today also. You seemed relieved when I just said, listen, this is the deal.
Right.
This is it, okay? I can't do this anymore. I've been trying to be polite about this, but I'm not going to be polite now. This is it. And you said, oh, okay, well, that's great. Now, thank you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's like. But the thing is, for some reason, we have to go through all that because you can't, you know? You just have to go through that.
Yes.
So there it is. It's okay.
Fine. It's kind of that simple concept of, but in a different way, you know, in order to experience light, you have to experience dark, otherwise you wouldn't know what light is, you know, so you need it all.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So a few weeks ago, I asked you a question about gender and race, and I wanted to ask that question in a different way.
Yeah.
How can we use this practice? Yeah, I think it's related to the practices surrender also. So some of us in this room have certain privilege because of our race in our society or our gender in our society. How can we use this practice to be more present with that privilege and be more aware of that?
Interesting. So I got a second answer, but I think I'll report to you the first answer that came up. First answer is that it's almost that I don't understand the question, because if you're aware, what else are you aware of? This is our life. So which thing are you going to be? What else is there to be aware of? Which is actually a very strict answer. It may seem like not a very strict answer. It's actually a very strict answer, because it's saying, the strict way of putting it, which I think your question is quite strict. So the strict answer is, if you're not aware of that, then you got a little ways to go in your mindfulness practice. Is that that's the thing. We typically divide apart the mindfulness practice from our lives. I'm going to sit in mindfulness practice and forget all that stuff in my corner with my incense and my bell. And that's not what I would consider to be mindfulness. Mindfulness means that we're aware of the situation. We're actually aware of what is happening. And we're not. See, the reason it's the first answer is it's just that that's what's happening. It's not like we have to figure it out. We're not figuring it out. It's not this mystery. Maybe some people have more power than other people. Maybe. We better do an investigation and see. Right? It's obvious. It's not some thing that you have to be clever and figure out. Right? It's obvious. It's so obvious that it's a confusing question. That's just what you're going to start noticing. Okay? So, that's such a strict answer that I think it's probably hard to understand. So I'll give you my second answer. But I think it's the right answer. That's just the reality. So if the practice isn't making that obvious, then the practice isn't a practice of mindfulness. Really? But that's the measure. If you're not noticing that, then you have a practice of delusion. You don't have a practice of mindfulness. So okay, too strict. I'll use the other one. The other one is but again, that's a useful answer. Sorry, but it's useful to see it that way, because it's just so simple then. Because then there's nothing else to do. It's just, okay, that's the situation. So now what do I do? Boom, that's it. Now what do I do? Now something has to be done now. Okay, it was so obvious. There was a problem. All right, what are we doing? Mm-hmm. It's just that simple. It just, ding, end. Just, that's it. It's so simple, it's hard. I don't know what to say. It just, okay, that's it. Now what are we doing? And so, okay, too strict, too simple, new approach. Ready? Here we go. Much more theoretical. Feels better to have it. So what? Oh, right. Oh, good. Good. Well, then I won't be then that, because I like this answer. But here's a theoretical answer. Okay, ready? Here we go. It's good. You're gonna like this one. It's okay. I know you're feeling unsatisfied with that, so this one will feel good. If you practice mindfulness, okay, I'll put it the other way. If you're stuck in pleasures that only come from materialism, okay, if that's the only source of pleasure for us, or to the extent that that is where we get our pleasure from, then you have every reason to just try to work your way up that ladder. of, as you say, privilege, of power. Does that make sense? If that's where you get your happiness, if you get your happiness from material things, from removing resources from others, then it makes perfect sense to work your way up that ladder. It's a very logical thing to do. And I bring that up because we have to face that in ourselves. That a lot of what we're doing as we try to make social change is actually just try to shift things around so that I have some more of the power. And that happens. And that's what's going to happen as long as we have that perspective. But if it is the case that we have actually escaped from dependence on that kind of security and happiness, if we've actually had that experience so that we gain a different kind of happiness than a kind of happiness that doesn't depend on power, on some people having more power than other people. If we have that kind of happiness available to us, then we become free to actually change the system. But if we're dependent on the system for our happiness, then even if we want to change it, deep down we don't want to change it. So it's essential for us who are in that position of privilege to actually remove ourselves from it with a daily practice so that we find that there's something else that can sustain us than that kind of security and pleasure that comes from power and privilege. So we actually experience that, and then we can see, and that's the point of what Peace Pilgrim is saying and what I was talking about today, for the first time we can see the system as it is. As long as we're dependent upon it and enslaved by it, we're not going to see it as it. We're going to, or even if we do, we'll find ways of avoiding doing what needs to be done to change it. Because I'll do it tomorrow or something. So by directly experiencing a kind of happiness that's independent, that does not come from a stratification of power and privilege, that really doesn't, that doesn't depend on having power over other people's resources. If that we've really experienced, then we can much more effectively, because we really want to, make a difference. But in my life, I'd say that the first one is a more powerful answer. Is that you see, this is just how it is, and then you're done. You have no choice. You're going to do something. You're going to give up your life.
Yeah.
It's it, and then you're done with the big conversation.
Yeah, I think the first answer is it's not always people, and it's very painful for a lot of people to see that privilege and avoid it. And it's not always material power or gaining material respect and certain social capital or social.
Right. Right. I'm including all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't just mean wealth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. That's right. It's painful, but again, that's what we're doing. That's why it's hard to answer. Right. We're sitting here and facing suffering and injustice. What else are we doing? Good. So right now we briefly have a chance to talk about social change. What are we going to do? And one thing is that an organization that I'm on the board of, Interfaith Power and Light, which is a wonderful organization that brings environmental issues, in particular global warming, to the fore in spiritual organizations such as ours. We are having a conference in the middle of October, the 16th and 17th, and I hope you all come. It's in White River Junction, Saturday and Sunday. So
That'll be the 15th and 16th.
Thank you very much. 15th and 16th, thanks. 15th and 16th of October. So mark that off on your calendars, cancel everything. Come and learn about the significance of how spiritual practice and issues around, in particular, global warming and the injustice, the absolute obliteration of a number of countries that is coming from that, and a number of species, a vast number of animal and plant species, how all of that connects, and therefore how we as a spiritual community can make a difference. Anything else? Yes?
So starting on September 27th for 5 Tuesdays, Jennifer Ducker, who was the woman earlier who was really passionate about Milton, she and I are going to be hosting a series of conversations based on the book Rama, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation by Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams and Lama Rod Owens, and then Jasmine Sayedullah. So for those of us who are still addicted to power, you can explore your addiction in this series of conversations. That'll be 6:45 to 8:15. Tuesday, September 27th. It starts. I'll be here next week too, so I'll have the place then. But it's in Burlington.
Yes. Yeah.
You have to answer next. So one thing is that there's a proposal to create a touristic structure with a gondola at the Grand Canyon that would kind of take people down from the surface to the river. Some people are opposed to that. I believe it's the Navajo Nation proposing this, and I'm perhaps thinking of it as a source of income for them to maybe help balance the inequalities they face. So if you're curious about that, you can just Google, gondola, Grand Canyon. I think an organization called American Rivers has more information, and you might find it's beneficial to that area, or you might, be opposed to it. But either way, you can look into that and see what you think. And then in the meeting, it came up that it would be nice. It sounds like locals here and the residents are interested in having closer connections, but I think we haven't necessarily known how to be in touch with each other about that. So I can put out a piece of paper there, and if you're a Burlingtonian and are interested in perhaps, getting to know the residents more, going out to eat, or having them stay with you, for the weekend, you can write down your name and email, and then we know. Because from my perspective, it hasn't been clear. Not as anyone's fault. I personally felt weird. Like, can I just go to that person and ask to stay at their house? I don't know. So we'll simplify this. So you can volunteer, and then you don't feel weird. It's pretty clear that way.
Also, you're welcome to stay at our house, and if you're interested, you can email me.
Yes.
Michael at Center for Mindful Learning Network.
Okay. That's all I got.
Yes.
So tomorrow, I forget where it is. I think it's at Battery Park. There's a picnic celebrate Labor Day, celebrate the creation of the weekend, which is what everything sounds like. I think that's at Battery Park. Yeah, is that where it is? That's where it usually is. Yeah. Rapid picnic. And there's a couple things Protect Blue Heights Park this week. There's hearing in Montpelier on Wednesday. It's like a rally at 10 and a hearing at 11. I might go to the hearing back to back in Burlington by 1, so anybody wants to go, I might go. And then I think they're having a benefit on Friday that costs $40, and there's sweet live music. I don't remember where it is. There's a big thing on there.
Great.
And then
I'll pay for someone.
yeah.
I can't go, but I'll pay for you to go. I'll pay your $40 for you if you go.
And then you might be aware of the resistance to the pipeline in South Dakota happening. And I think, there's fundraising out there to help people get there. And
Sacred Stones Camp. Yeah, there's a GoFundMe.
Like a fun,
Yeah.
so yeah. Encourage individuals to really react.
Great. Yes.
And just to reinstate that anyone in the Burlington community who wants to be a part of seeing how we can get together and support each other here in Burlington, not on Sundays, but just on other days of the week, what that might look like. I'll try to get the space at 4. I can't guarantee that, but maybe we can. I'll send out. Also, let's plan on meeting here at 4 and going to 5, and seeing what comes up. And if you have ideas about what we can do, please bring them to that gathering. Next Sunday, maybe 3:30.
Well, they can be in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's not completely guaranteed yet if we can have a space because this is a Quaker house. And so I have to ask Chris, but let's plan on that, and I'll contact CML and send out an email about that.
Very good.
Okay, one more.
Yeah.
If you use an EpiPen or know somebody who uses an EpiPen that are impacted by the that's been in the news a lot around hypertension. And we're trying to use that in publication and campaigns to highlight the high cost of pharmaceuticals and how it impacts people, and happen to be a really great example. So if you happen to know anybody that's really impacted by that, let me know.
Very good.
Yeah.